Hi everyone, welcome to Anthropology of AI, where we ask one big questions. How do we stay human in the age of algorithms? I'm your host Val. I'm a rogue anthropologist decoding our weird and wonderful relationship with tech. Just to be clear, this podcast is my playground. My thoughts are my own. If you're ready to rehumanize tech, you're in the right place. Let's dig in. I want to introduce Merve Hokamp, ex-Google leader, Unsaid MBA, and executive coach. So Merve pairs AI-driven, data-backed leadership tools with something very wonderfully analog, the Lego serious play, in order to help executives to get past dashboards and back to decisions that matter. This conversation is not going to be about tech versus touchy-feely. It's a field study. As AI sort of eats routine management, what distinctly human capabilities become non-negotiable? Attention, listening, cultural intelligence. We talked a little bit about that. And then how can leaders scale that? So we'll talk about the level 3 global listening, the cross-cultural teams. So if you're rethinking your path or if you're rewriting your org, this episode is your compass. So Merve, thank you so much for joining and welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Amazing. So as I mentioned, today we're going to talk about this cultural shift. And Merve, you've written about something that you call the great corporate exodus. It's the way of high-performing leaders leaving big companies to build something with meaning. And from your lens, as both strategist and coach and a leader, how much of that shift is driven by culture and how much by technology?
That's such a good question. I think of AI sometimes as both the mirror, if you will, and the magnifier or the magnifying glass of leadership and corporate careers in general as well. It shows people what part of their job is truly valuable or value add and what parts are just, maybe in the case of leaders, managerial busy work, right? So I work with a lot of leaders, as you know, in managerial positions, and they come to me saying, I have all these brilliant ideas. I want to innovate. I want to create, but I wish that I had this chunk of time where I could block 4 hours to work on this great idea, to strategize, to create, to come up with a roadmap or road plan to execute it. But I don't have that time. I'm pulled in all sorts of different directions. I'm too busy with my admin, with reporting, with politics, with just managerial busy work, really. Well, now, all of a sudden, AI can do a big chunk of that work. And I think that in general is very positive, but it also is a bit of a shift, as you have put it really well. It's, let's say, both liberating, but can also be terrifying because it gets you to ask yourself, if you're a leader, well, if the machine can do the repetitive part of my job, what's left for me to do? So maybe all the strategic work, maybe all the creative work, maybe all the innovative work. As we've said, that's something that they've been wanting to do, but then they're also programmed to do all of these busy work. So some of the things that we just think are the bread and butter of management or of leadership, AI tools can now do, and they will only get better. So it's a bit of a existential dilemma that I think once you're out of it, you then seek your purpose, your meaning, your creativity. And that, I think, is primarily why people are leaving corporate to seek meaning and purpose and build careers that maybe is a portfolio of different things that they can do where they can really add value and add human value.
Yeah. So your perspective is that while technology is freeing leaders from the grind and giving them space to finally ask deeper questions of purpose, it also is amplifying a different kind of pressure, sort of the need to prove our human worth in systems that increasingly optimize for efficiency and output.
That's exactly what I think. Yeah. I think we are being put in a position where even to ourselves, we have to prove to ourselves, well, what's the human meaning or what's the human impact here, right? And we use AI as tools, as enablers, as enhancers, as assistants, augmenters, you name it. I think it should be part of the human experience. Well, it already is part of the human experience, but it should continue to be a part of the experience and maybe increasingly more so. However, there's a human element there, which is something that only humans can do, or humans can do with the help of AI, that is kind of brings us the question of, well, what is that really? How do we implement it? How do we execute it in the best way possible? And then what's in it for me in my life? If this job can be done by machines, then maybe I should leave this job and do something else that's more meaningful to me, that's more meaningful for the world.
So that's challenging us to anchor ourselves and to even go on this discovery journey of what it means to be human.
100%. And that's a big question. I don't claim to have figured it out myself, but I think it's a good question. I think I love that word challenge. I think it's a challenging question, but in a good way, so positively so. And I think it's going to make us stretch, and it's going to make us enhance really ourselves.
Yeah. And on that, can you talk a little bit more about the three levels of listening, with the highest one being global listening, sensing what's not said, the context, the emotion, the energy? Can you tell more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the listeners or your viewers who are not familiar with the three levels of listening, the first level is to listen to respond. So that's something that we all sometimes do, and that's okay, right? We're thinking, oh, you have blonde hair, I have red hair. Tell me more about your job. You are in New York, I am in Dublin. And so I'm listening to the information, but so that I can respond with my facts or my responses, right? So that's level one listening. Very superficial, not bad, but not deep enough, arguably. Level two listening is active listening. It's listening to understand. So then I might say, oh, you live in New York. What's that like? What's New York like? It's a big city. Do you enjoy it? Do you really take advantage of the amenities? So I really want to understand what your truth is and what your story is, right? So a little bit deeper, but then there's the level three listening, which you've said it. It's called global listening. We call that listening to sense or listening to listen, right? Which is where I listen to the facts that you're sharing with me. I listen to the information and how it's making you feel, and all of the truth around those superficial facts. And I also listen to what's not being said. So, in other words, understand maybe some friction or some feeling or some emotion in the silence or in what's happening between the lines or between the words. There might be some discomfort that something's off, maybe, right? Only humans can sense that in this, at least where we are right now. So, level one listening in the context of AI can do that very well, right? Probably even better than humans, to be honest. So some of the superficial things of note taking, for example, or summarizing the follow-ups, the action items, the overarching maybe sentiment, right? If I say I'm happy, then it says, okay, so Myra said that she's happy, so her sentiment is happy. Whereas as the human, I might tell you, yeah, no, all's good. I'm happy. Happy. Yeah. Am I happy? Or you might question, oh, well, you don't sound very happy. I mean, if you said it that way, it might be a little bit judgmental, but you immediately, because you have a human brain, you immediately picked up on the fact that, oh, well, she's saying that she's happy, but there's something there. She might be happy for the most part, but there's something going on, right? So that's kind of, I sometimes tell my clients, you can use AI as your analyst or as your assistant, but not as your antenna, right? So just being alert and understanding the tone and understanding what's not being said is something that I think stays with the humans. And that's important to teams, to organizations, to culture, and to psychological safety. And the list goes on.
Fascinates me. So I have two follow-up questions. So one is, how do I get better? How can I train myself to be a good global listener? And then also, how are you actually helping leaders to protect and even amplify that skill, especially when everything around them is optimized for speed and data.
Yeah. I think allowing the time, and it sounds too simple on the one hand, or it sounds too impossible in the fast paced world that we live in, especially in corporate lives or leadership lives, as you say. But time definitely is a factor. But there is actually a good checklist or cheat sheet, if you will. The first thing I always tell people is lead with curiosity. Just show up. And sometimes, sometimes it doesn't come naturally, but it is a learned skill. So you can fake it till you become it, right? So you can say, I'm going to go talk to Val and I'm going to be curious. Now, that sounds a little bit mechanic and maybe not too emotional or maybe not too genuine. But if you actually intentionally, genuinely mean it, you can show up to a meeting and say, I'm going to lead with curiosity. So when you tell me you live in New York, I will say, what's that like? And then human beings, we love stories. We are wired to be empathetic to other humans and their emotions. So once you maybe force yourself, and I know that's not a great word, but I'm not going to sweeten it for you. Once you force yourself into it by telling yourself, I'm going to be curious and I'm going to ask open, powerful questions, then you kind of already find yourself in it oftentimes. So what does it mean? So first curiosity, then open powerful questions. Open questions are ones that don't have an answer of yes or no, right? So they usually start with the 3 W's. So what, where, when, why. And then also we have how. Okay, so 4 W's and how. So those are open questions, as opposed to asking you, do you live in New York? Yes. Okay, well, then the conversation's over. I can ask you, where do you live? What's that like? How do you like it? So then more and more the stories come out, and then I can ask more questions. And so a relationship is built, a mutual trust is built from that. And then, of course, the other thing is there's a long list, and I won't get into it all. But the other thing is we need to minimize distractions. And guess what? The biggest distraction is, which it feels ironic saying this on an AI related podcast, but our conversation at least, it's our cell phones and it's all of our devices. It's all of our, we were talking about it with my family the other day, that in our kitchen we talk and sometimes Google comes up because we have a Google Home, and Google comes up and says, what's that now? Or the weather in this location tomorrow is this, because it's listening. Sometimes it says funny things, but it's always listening, right? So it's a distraction. Even when you actually don't proactively look at the distraction, it can be a distraction. So really allowing that time, the space, and then leading with curiosity and open, powerful questions.
I feel like my whole life is a constant distraction. The more it's my personal interests, such as this podcast, it's like a distraction of a distraction. It's actually relatively easy to get distracted when you already are surrounded by distractions.
So I say I'm a big believer in practice in general, right? So if you want to be amazing at piano, then you need to practice every day. And guess what? At first, you're not going to sound good. And also, it's not going to be very fun. And also, it's not going to seem very natural. And so a lot of people give up at that stage, understandably so, because there's big friction, there's big frustration, and then comes a tipping point where you're feeling, okay, well, I'm getting the hang of it. Actually, it's not too bad. Okay, so then you stick with it, and then at some point, you actually get to a point where you're an expert or you're in that flow state, and it just feels natural, right? Even though you're practicing, it has become a habit. So the learning curve is kind of like there's ups and downs and ups and downs, and then after that, hopefully, it just kind of in a linear way goes up, or maybe even exponentially. I think recognizing that is really important. So in anything, including in presence. So to practice presence, you have to put yourself through some, and I know this word sometimes is triggering, but through some suffering, to be honest. Right now, if you, and I ask my clients and coaching clients particularly, what feels natural to them, right? I wouldn't necessarily tell them, here is what you need to do. And so they identify those things. But they're not comfortable, and they're not comfortable things. And I can tell you that my clients don't, I think in the big picture, and I hope in the big picture they like me. But when we're discussing this, they don't like me. They don't like this. They're not excited about it. But, is it putting your phone, outside of the room when you're eating dinner with your family. Some people prefer that, and some people think that it would be a nice to have. Some people maybe not. But if you have said that that's something that's a nice to have, guess what? You have to force yourself to put, and there are no exceptions. I don't care about an emergency or a falsely, urgent email from work or whatever it might be. So just maybe finding, or if you have to meditate, if you're saying, I'm going to meditate every morning, for 5 minutes and I'm not going to be distracted. It's like, okay, so then what's a good space? What's a good environment? What are some good conditions that you can think about that can make you do that? So realistically ambitious, uncomfortable goals you set for yourself and you practice them. And at some point it kind of becomes a habit and it's not that hard anymore. The only other thing I would say, and relatedly but separately, is when you're in flow, you are, and this has been scientifically studied, of course, you are less likely to be and to want to be distracted. So, and flow graph, if we were to go into the science of it, is enough skill and enough challenge. If you have too much challenge, not enough skill, then you're in panic zone because it's too hard for you. You're panicking. You'll be distracted. You won't be in flow. If you have too much skill, not enough challenge, that's boredom zone. You are too skilled and it's not challenging enough for you. You're kind of bored. You'll be distracted. You'll be looking at your phone. The flow state is the perfect optimum place between skill and challenge, right? So if it's something that you're skilled at and that's a little bit challenging for you, like think, basketball for NBA players or something like that, right? They're obviously very skilled, but it's also challenging if they're playing against a team who also is very good, right? They're in flow state. They're not thinking as they're shooting the basketball, oh, let me just look at my phone really quick. Maybe there's something on Instagram, right? They're kind of in the moment. So putting yourself into situations, not saying, become the professional basketball player, but I do work with my clients on what their flow state is and then trying to find situations or find the context where they can increase the amount of time they spend in their flow state, just so that they're not inclined to even want to become distracted.
The flow state. I love it. You often describe your practice as sitting at the intersection of AI-driven insight and deeply human work. And coaching is by nature intimate because it's built on trust and intuition and presence. So how do you bring technology and AI in particular into that space without losing its soul? So can you give us a glimpse of what, for example, AI augmented coaching actually looks like in practice? And how do you balance metrics and meeting and dashboards and a dialogue?
So it's a really good question. I do believe that trust and level 3 listening, which we just talked about, which obviously is very important in coaching when you're the coach, don't require and don't merit AI tools. I'll just go out there and say that, right? Everything else, maybe I could say 50% of the work, really, just in terms of time spent, I have pretty much automated. So all of the tools of my business, well, I don't have all my tools automated, but most of the tools that I use regularly in my business. So some of the more mundane admin stuff like scheduling, for example, or invoicing, or or if I'm to write some content, for example, I write all of my content, but then it's structured, it is edited, it is formatted by my AI assistants or AI tools. I schedule my social media posts. And so there's a lot of automation basically that I use for my business, that whether it be lead generation or actually servicing my clients. In my one-to-one coaching sessions, which I have a lot of them, a lot of clients, I rarely bring an AI assistant or AI note taker into the session just because of the confidentiality of it. And also, somehow I think people find, unless they ask me for it, sometimes my clients actually bring their note takers, but somehow people feel a bit creeped out, to be honest. And I understand because it's an environment of trust. sometimes I'm no therapist, but sometimes, we talk about deep stuff and sometimes people really express their feelings or they're crying in my sessions and stuff like that. So I think they just want to feel that psychological safety. And when there's an AI assistant there taking notes or whatever they're doing, I think it kind of maybe gets in the way of that. My group sessions, my workshops, my trainings have an element of AI, and I will often then also get AI to diagnose certain things or to derive insights or data from insights or conclusions from data. Like I'll give you an example. They ask me to do this, by the way. Of course, I always take permission, but I worked with a team. So team coaching, a team of 11 people, and there were some power dynamics. This is a recent thing. So they said, will I also give them it was coaching, it was a bit of training. Will I also give them my sort of observations? And so I did a bit of sentiment analysis and I did a bit of diagnosis. And some people in all of the meetings that we had talked the most, others talked the least. But when you talk to them separately, the ones who are talking the least feel like they're being overpowered. And so there you go, power dynamic, right? So if you're the coach and the facilitator, you kind of sense this anyway, but then looking at the data, it's really helpful. Your AI assistant says, Jane talked 5% of the time, but John talked 55% of the time in an 11-person meeting. And guess what? It was both of their projects that was being presented. It's the diagnosis and the data insights and meaning that can be derived from them that AI helps me with in my coaching, consulting, training business.
I love that. And can you tell us more about the Lego piece? So you're a licensed Lego series play facilitator. It uses on creativity with executives who live in spreadsheets. So
Yes.
what happens when they step away from the screens and
Yeah.
start thinking with their hands again? And do you see this tactile creativity as a kind of antidote to digital overwhelm, or perhaps as a bridge that helps leaders relate to technology in more imaginative and less fearful ways?
Yeah. So talk about flow state. This is one thing that I see over and over and over again, not just Lego, which I'll talk about in a second, but whenever I put together or I observe others put together a playful leadership training or workshop environment where they are stepping away from their digital tools and spreadsheets and they're playing, but it's serious at the same time. They find themselves in that flow state where they lose sense of time and they don't want to look at their phones and see their messages and things like that. So absolutely, it's a great tool for a connection and it's a great tool to put people into a space where they're really thinking deeply and it's embodied work. So what it is, taking a step back for your viewers or listeners who are not familiar, Lego series play is exactly what it sounds like. So you play with Legos, but it is serious. So it's a tool that often is used in business contexts, but also can be used in school contexts, and different kind of groups of people can come together to play with Lego to then derive insights from it. So that's what we do. Is there's a methodology to it. That's the certification that I have. There's methodology to it. So you get people to little by little work with Legos to represent certain things. You might have a theme, let's say that, it's psychological safety, or we did one actually about their annual planning. So strategy and planning, business planning recently with a company. And so it can be about anything really, but you express it first individually and then as a group with Legos as you build with your hands what that strategy might look like, or what psychological safety as part of our culture might look like. Your question was, how does it then connect to AI? Or it's very analog for sure. It connects us to our primitive roots, if you will, and people do think and create with their hands. So it's really important that it's very hands-on. But we do also, again, in this day and age, connect it to AI. So you can take that embodied experience, right? Take it back. The team that worked with me on creating their business plan and their annual plan, they actually took all of that strategy and thinking and creativity and innovation, which there were many breakthroughs for them in the room, into their AI world, right? And into their computer world, where they then operationalize and executionalize the strategy and the high level innovation that they planned all together with their Legos playing hands on.
So they strategize through play,
Hmm.
problem solve through play.
Hmm.
Um, they generate creative ideas through play. And so that facilitates that human connection that then enables the spark to come up with new, fresh ideas to either problem solve or find the right strategy, find the right approach, and most importantly, bring people together in that process.
You said it beautifully. That's exactly right. I think there's the connection through collaboration and through thinking together and through building together is fascinating to see. I've done quite a few at this point, and every time I'm moved almost. So it's a basic human need and it's a basic human talent that when we come together and build together and create together, something just beautiful happens.
Reminds me of a design sprint, and I had a conversation with another expert who was a guest, and it also really just reminds me of actually one of your posts that I absolutely loved, and it spoke to you were talking about the fact that people want to be able to connect their work to the impact and to the meaning and feel like they're part of something significant. And that to them removes a lot of, I guess, a lot of hesitation and concern of whether they're doing the right thing and puts them in that state where they are more willing to contribute and are more open to sort of recognize that they're part of a broader system.
It's so true. I think people are very unique and our uniqueness comes out. And if we're just sitting on our computers, as much as I love AI, and I do, if it's not coming across, let me say that explicitly here. And I think it's a hugely positive thing for the humankind and for the universe. But if we just sit at our computers, create AI generated content, which is pretty generic, right? And write our emails with AI and do our work with AI, submit to the person, our manager, whoever it needs to be submitted to, and then they give their comments with AI, then it's just AI talking to each other and we become sort of the same, there's sameness. So I think we need to bring people together in corporate setting, leadership setting, and in general, right? In schools, I also think that I have young kids, so I'm very passionate about it also in education, where you need to bring people together. And as opposed to screens, we need to play with Legos and talk strategy. We don't need to just free play, even though that's good too. But have a theme, have something that you can bond over, that you can create over, and then that feeling also you bring back into the office and you bring to the computer. Humans need to communicate. It's so important. I do workshops where another recent one this summer that I had with a global team, and they've known each other for a while and they've worked together. But somebody said, in kind of a initially apprehensive way, but then they came out there and said, some of the people in this room used to scare me a lot. And now I'm not terrified anymore because they played together and they built together. They sat together, broke bread together, so to speak. They were able to create that psychological safety that didn't exist before. I only knew them from their emails before, from some short meeting where they were maybe feeling angry about something that didn't necessarily go according to plan. So we need those moments to take a step back and reflect and come together.
100%. We need those moments where we can meet each other and see each other and feel seen. And often I'm noticing in our, well, not just work environment, actually in our broader cultural environment, we sort of go from one thing to another and we forget to even sometimes introduce ourselves or understand better where the other person is or where they're at becomes very transactional. And I don't think anyone is satisfied with that dynamic. And maybe that's the reason why we ultimately all sort of crave that like quick, you know, boost of joy that comes through, feeling like we're solving something by just maybe scrolling or, clicking like on an ad or maybe purchasing something or maybe just doom scrolling really. It just gives us that satisfaction that we sort of actually lack. during our day to day because of the way our culture is. While you were talking about that example, my following question pops up is the fact that you led teams and you coached leaders across more than 20 countries. And now the technology and the AI tools promise to sort of erase the barriers, and things like real-time translation and cultural summaries, charts or maps, and the tone analysis. They're all meant to make this global collaboration to feel seamless. But does seamless always mean better? Do these tools really help us understand each other, or do they perhaps risk flattening nuance and creating kind of sort of an algorithmic monoculture of communication that you actually referred to previously? Like, I read an email with AI and then someone replies, and ultimately who's talking there? So from your experience, how can leaders use AI to connect without erasing the difference? And what are the new responsibilities that come with that power?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that sameness is something to really think about, or that monoculture. I love that term as well. We don't want to create that. I think we kind of almost like cultural clashes, as long as they're healthy and as long as they're funny and as long as they kind of accentuate that difference, right? We want diversity. I think ultimately we see it in corporate, we see it in student teams, we see it in the world too. Ultimately, it's the diverse teams, diverse groups that perform the best. Now, in the short term, the more homogeneous, the more same, the higher the performance. But in the long term, which is what we want to plan for and which is what we want to think about if we are visionaries and if we are strategic about it, it's the diversity that wins. It's been scientifically studied, and I wholeheartedly believe that. Now, I think the tools and AI for sure, I think absolutely helps us. And it can almost be, I think of AI in general as an assistant, as a really good assistant. If you think about, for instance, presidents, or I don't know if you watch this show, if you're familiar with this show, Veep, which I love, but the vice president, or then she becomes president anyway. So she has an assistant, right? So Gary always walks around with her, right? And then when she's about to shake people's hands, and you can imagine she's the president or the vice president of the United States, she shakes a lot of hands, that Gary just whispers in her ear, oh, well, Valerie lives in New York and you had met her at this thing and you want to check on her husband because he was sick before, that kind of thing. Or you want to, so talking about cultural communication, this person is from Japan and you want to bow to them, but don't bow too low, don't bow too high, that kind of thing. Okay. So I think that's really helpful, right? So I think AI can be our Gary in that way. And I know a lot of clients who work globally and they work for global companies and they find themselves in global negotiation situations where before they travel to the country, they will ask their ChatGPT really quick, okay, so what are some top line customs that I need to be aware of, or that I need to, maybe even employ or perform if I want this negotiation to go in an amicable way? I think that's extremely helpful. Or if you want to translate your email or use it for cultural translation, even because, some cultures, they like karaoke, other cultures like other things, right? They like going to the pub, for example, the Irish. So if you were to even translate those customs, I think that's absolutely helpful. It can give you a little boost and be an assistant, but it does not take the place of the real interaction, in which we almost want these cultural intricacies for diversity, for variety, as well as a bit of humor, maybe.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. And I think one thing is to be informed of what that custom looks like, or what, the local traditions or perhaps even rules are, in order for a person to be informed sort of intellectually. I think there is a unique human value in actually embracing some of those customs and traditions and kind of going with the flow. For instance, if you have, like one part of I think Nordics really value and appreciate like sauna, and then if you kind of
Yeah.
embrace that, and or if you go to Ireland and you end up going to the pub. Or there's another thing, I think the dog race, like the people just
Yes.
love experience that. And if you do that, or you come to New York and you go to like a Yankee game, it's like an experience that will help you connect with the people that you're working with. And in the past, I think there was this narrative that would dismiss that as sort of irrational, because it propagated like this one worldview that is sort of objective, which we all know is not the case. But ultimately, if we want to develop that curiosity and cultural intelligence, one thing is to be informed and have like this cultural card, like this is what you say, this is what's appropriate, this is what's not. But then experiencing that and participating, and that's like a pure anthropological endeavor. And yeah, and I think that's actually quite good for everyone to, again, just from that example that you shared, feel less scared.
Yeah, and I think, a client of mine has a what does she call her? Culture assistant, I think I want to say, or it's agentic AI basically. And the assistant, who also has a name, even though she's a machine and she's AI, is writes basically her content. So this is a high level executive, does a lot of presentations, does a lot of speaking, and works for a global conglomerate, so travels the world. So she will say, and sometimes she even gets into arguments with her assistant, which is hilarious to listen to. But she will say, for instance, recently she traveled to the Nordics, and she's from a culture that's a bit of a high context culture, so very non-confrontational. Whereas in the Nordics, you kind of say it how it is, I think, right? It's a very direct culture. So in her speech, I think it was an opening keynote for some conference, for example, she said the things that she wanted to say, but with the lens of Nordics communication preferences, right? Which is more direct as opposed to maybe bit more non-confrontational and a bit more high level. This was more, well, this didn't work. This project failed, and this is how it failed, etc. But this is what we're going to do about it. Whereas in her culture, you would never say it failed. You would say, this was a great opportunity. Now we're moving on to another opportunity, type of thing. So, I mean, it's just isn't that fascinating that you can get an assistant who will say the exact same thing? So the content, the brains of the operation is still you, but then when you actually communicate to an audience that has a different lens of their receiving end of the communication, you actually can cater to them based on their preference and based on their culture. So yeah, same is true for emails, and same is true for any kind of content. So I think it really can help us reach our audience in a way that is authentic and that is connecting.
Yeah, optimize tone
Yes.
for the specific audience to make it sound more relevant and less, I guess, distractive in a way. I also name my agents, by the way. I think it's like a thing. It's almost like it makes it more real.
I haven't started naming mine yet. You must. I mean, they have names, like they have robot names, but they don't have real, person names. But maybe going back to the conversation going back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of our conversation with the names, maybe I should kind of play around with different names for my agents. You're giving me ideas.
What's in the name, right? Isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think we have time for one final question. And again, thank you so much for coming in and all the amazing insights that you share. You often say that the next frontier of leadership is learning to lead human AI teams or augmented human teams.
Mhm.
What does psychological safety mean when part of your team doesn't feel yet still influences how people work? And if you could leave today's leaders with one message or one practice for building truly human AI teams, what would it be?
Yeah, okay. I think you cheated there, Valerie. You said one last question, but I think that's multiple questions. I'll try to be concise. So, yes, I believe in the marriage, if you will, of machine intelligence and human intelligence. So, it's also termed hybrid intelligence. So, in teams of the future, work with leaders on how they themselves should lead by example by using these tools as augmenters, as enhancers, as we've said, as enablers, and not as sort of generic producers of half-baked stuff. That's one thing that, I don't know if it's advice, but it's definitely something that helps with psychological safety as well, because people want to feel valued, as you've said very nicely. People want to feel seen, and people want to add value, and people want to be in that flow state that we talked about. And in order to be in that flow state, they need to be producing, creating, ideating, innovating. So give them that space while at the same time equip them with the tools and the intelligence, the augmented intelligence that will actually enable them to do more with more impact. Advice, I think I try to tell my clients and my networks that we shouldn't try to outperform AI. I think it's not realistic, and I think it's also not necessary. I think we should let AI, or whether we let it or not, it probably will happen anyway, but we should let AI go as far as it can. And then we should differentiate ourselves from AI. We should learn how to work with AI. We should learn how to be complementary to our AI and how to marry, in a figurative sense, AI. So that's my advice. Don't try to perform it. Learn how to work with it.
Awesome. So it's kind of like the successful marriage is a dance of
It's a
leading
dance.
out and perhaps leaning in where it makes sense for a human to truly lead with the human skills, relying on the intelligence that is built upon the collective intelligence blinds of humanity, which, how can you compete with that, right? But learn how to leverage that. And that dance, I think, ultimately is a practice to your previous points. Like you have to sort of do it and learn and share the learnings, which we'll continue doing in this podcast and sharing the learnings with others. And thank you so much for all the examples and for being so open. And thank you for all your work.
Thank you very much. This was fun. I was in a flow state. I didn't even know where all the time went.